long before Rome ruled the Mediterranean. Another empire controlled lands from India to Greece. Tonight we journey through 1200 years of Persian history. The Persian Empire was not just another ancient kingdom. It was the first true world empire. At its peak, it stretched over 5.5 million square kilometers. That made it larger than any empire before it. But how did this empire begin? And what made it so powerful? To understand this, we need to go back to the Iranian Plateau in the 7th century BC. The Iranian Plateau and early peoples. The story of Persia begins on the Iranian Plateau. This vast highland region sits between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. The climate was harsh. Winters were cold, summers were dry. But this land would become the heart of a great empire. Around 1000 BC, Indo-European tribes migrated to this region. They came from the steppes of Central Asia. These tribes brought horses. They brought new technologies. Most importantly, they brought new ideas about government and society. Two groups were particularly important. The Medes settled in the north and west. The Persians settled in the south, in a region that would later be called Fars or Persis. The Persians were initially a small tribe. They were nomadic herders. They moved their flocks across the mountains. They lived in tents. Their society was based on kinship and tribal loyalty. But the Persians had something special. They had strong leadership traditions. They valued honor and truth. These values would later become central to their empire. The Median Kingdom. Before the Persians rose to power, the Medes dominated the Iranian Plateau. The Median Kingdom emerged around 678 BC. Their capital was Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan in Iran. The Medes were skilled warriors. They used cavalry effectively. They also learned from their neighbors. From the Assyrians, they adopted siege warfare. From the Scythians, they learned archery techniques. King Phraates united the Median tribes around 647 BC. He began expanding Median territory. His successor Cyaxares continued this expansion. Cyaxares was a military reformer. He organized the army into units. He separated archers, spear-bearers, and cavalry. In 612 BC, the Medes achieved their greatest victory. They allied with Babylon. Together they destroyed the Assyrian Empire. The mighty city of Nineveh fell. The Assyrian capital was completely destroyed. This victory made the Medes the dominant power in western Iran. They controlled trade routes. They collected tribute from smaller kingdoms. The Persian tribes, including the Achaemenids, paid tribute to the Median kings. The Achaemenid dynasty origin. The Achaemenid dynasty traced its origins to a legendary figure named Achaemenes. According to Persian tradition, Achaemenes was the first king of the Persian tribes. He lived around 700 BC. But the real founder of Achaemenid power was Tispes. He ruled around 675–640 BC. Tispes controlled the kingdom of Anshan in southwestern Iran. Anshan was strategically located. It controlled important trade routes between Mesopotamia and the Iranian Plateau. Tispes divided his kingdom between his sons. Cyrus the First received Anshan. Ariarmnes received another part of Persis. This division would later cause problems. The Achaemenid line would split into two branches. Cyrus ruled Anshan as a vassal of the Medes. He paid tribute to the Median king, but he also built up Persian strength. He improved agriculture. He encouraged trade. He trained warriors. The Persians during this time were still a relatively small people. They numbered perhaps 300,000 to 500,000 people total. Most were farmers and herders, but they had a strong warrior culture. Young Persian men learned three things: to ride horses, to shoot arrows, and to speak the truth. Cyrus the Great. Early life. Cyrus II, known to history as Cyrus the Great, was born around 600 BC. He was the son of Cambyses I, king of Anshan. His mother may have been related to the Median royal family. This connection would later prove important. The early life of Cyrus is wrapped in legend. The Greek historian Herodotus tells a dramatic story. According to Herodotus, the Median king Astyages, had a dream. In this dream, his daughter would give birth to a son who would overthrow him. When this daughter gave birth to Cyrus, Astyages ordered the baby killed. But a shepherd saved the child. Cyrus grew up in the mountains. He learned the ways of simple herders. This humble upbringing supposedly gave him wisdom and compassion. Modern historians question this story. It sounds very similar to other ancient tales. The stories of Moses and Romulus and Remus follow similar patterns, but there might be some truth in it. What we know for certain is that Cyrus became king of Anshan around 559 BC. He inherited a small kingdom, but he also inherited something more valuable, the loyalty of the Persian tribes. Cyrus was different from other kings of his time. He was pragmatic. He understood that ruling a diverse empire required tolerance. He respected local customs. He allowed people to keep their religions. This approach would become the foundation of Persian imperial policy. The revolt against the Medes. Around 553 BC, Cyrus made a fateful decision. He stopped paying tribute to the Median king Astyages. This was a declaration of independence. It was also a declaration of war. Astyages was furious. He gathered a large army. He marched south to crush the Persian rebellion. The Median army was much larger than the Persian force. It seemed like an easy victory. But Cyrus had advantages that Astyages underestimated. The Persian army was more motivated. They were fighting for freedom. The Median army included many reluctant vassals. Some of them secretly supported Cyrus. The decisive battle came in 550 BC. The location is uncertain, but it was probably near Pasargadae in southern Iran. During the battle, part of the Median army defected to Cyrus. Astyages was captured. Cyrus treated his prisoner with respect. He did not execute Astyages. Instead, he kept him at court with honor. This merciful treatment impressed many people. It showed that Cyrus was different from other conquerors. The victory over the Medes transformed the political landscape. Cyrus now controlled the entire Iranian plateau. He inherited all Median territories and vassals. The small kingdom of Anshan had become a major power. Expansion into Anatolia. With the Median kingdom conquered, Cyrus looked west toward Anatolia. This region, in modern-day Turkey, was rich and divided. Several kingdoms competed for control. The most powerful of these was Lydia, ruled by King Croesus. Croesus was famous for his wealth. The phrase rich as Croesus comes from his legendary fortune. Lydia had invented coinage. It controlled profitable trade routes between Asia and Europe. Croesus was alarmed by Cyrus's rise. He saw the Persian expansion as a threat to Lydia. Around 547 BC, Croesus decided to attack first. He crossed the Halys River, the traditional boundary between Lydia and the former Median territory. According to Herodotus, Croesus consulted the oracle at Delphi before attacking. The oracle told him that if he attacked Cyrus, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus took this as encouragement, but the oracle's words were ambiguous. The first battle was inconclusive. Winter was approaching. Croesus returned to his capital at Sardis. He dismissed most of his army for the winter. He expected fighting to resume in spring. But Cyrus surprised him. The Persian army continued marching through winter. They reached Sardis, while Croesus was unprepared. The siege of Sardis lasted only 14 days. The city fell. Croesus was captured. Again, Cyrus showed mercy. He spared Croesus's life. He even made him an advisor. This clemency became part of Cyrus's reputation. People began to see him as a just ruler, not just a conqueror. The conquest of Babylon. Cyrus's next target was Babylon. This was the greatest city in Mesopotamia. It was also one of the most strongly fortified cities in the ancient world. The Babylonian king Nabonidus ruled a wealthy kingdom, but he was unpopular with his own people. Nabonidus had made a crucial mistake. He favored the moon god Sin over Marduk, the traditional patron god of Babylon. This angered the priests and citizens of Babylon. They saw it as an insult to their traditions. Cyrus understood this situation. He presented himself as the liberator of Babylon, not its conqueror. He claimed that Marduk had chosen him to restore proper worship. This was brilliant propaganda. In 539 BC, the Persian army approached Babylon, but they did not need to besiege the city. Cyrus had agents inside Babylon. These agents opened the gates. The Persian army entered without a fight. The conquest of Babylon was bloodless. Cyrus immediately went to the temple of Marduk. He performed the traditional rituals. He showed respect for Babylonian customs. The people welcomed him as a liberator. This conquest gave Cyrus control of all Mesopotamia. It also brought him immense wealth. Babylon was the center of a trading network that stretched from Egypt to India. Cyrus now controlled this network. More importantly, the fall of Babylon had symbolic significance. Babylon was ancient. It was mentioned in the Bible. Its conquest showed that Cyrus was truly a world conqueror. The Cyrus Cylinder. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus commissioned a remarkable document. Modern historians call it the Cyrus Cylinder. It was written in cuneiform script on a clay cylinder. The cylinder describes Cyrus's conquest of Babylon, but more importantly, it outlines his policies toward conquered peoples. Cyrus promised to respect local customs and religions. He pledged to return displaced peoples to their homelands. Some historians call the Cyrus Cylinder the first charter of human rights. This may be an exaggeration. The cylinder was primarily propaganda, but it does show Cyrus's approach to ruling a diverse empire. The cylinder specifically mentions the return of exiled peoples to their lands. This included the Jewish exiles in Babylon. Cyrus allowed them to return to Jerusalem. He even helped fund the rebuilding of their temple. This policy of tolerance was revolutionary. Most ancient conquerors destroyed local customs. They imposed their own gods and laws. Cyrus did the opposite. He preserved diversity within unity. Liberation of the Jews. One of Cyrus's most famous acts was liberating the Jewish exiles. In 586 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed Jerusalem. He had taken many Jews into exile in Babylon. For nearly 50 years, the Jews lived in Babylon. Some prospered there. They built communities. They maintained their traditions. But many longed to return to their homeland. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, he reversed this policy. The Bible's book of Ezra describes his proclamation. Cyrus declared that the God of Israel had chosen him to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This was not just religious tolerance. It was smart politics. Cyrus understood that happy subjects were loyal subjects. By allowing the Jews to return, he gained their gratitude and support. The return to Jerusalem began around 538 BC. Not all Jews chose to return. Many had established lives in Babylon, but thousands did make the journey back to Judah. Cyrus provided resources for rebuilding the temple. He returned the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken. This generosity was remembered for centuries. The Bible calls Cyrus a Messiah, meaning an anointed one. Expansion to the east. While Cyrus was conquering western territories, he also expanded eastward. The Iranian plateau extended far to the east. Beyond it lay Central Asia and India. Cyrus campaigned in these eastern regions around 545–40 BC. He conquered Sogdiana, a region in modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. He also took control of Bactria in northern Afghanistan. These eastern campaigns were difficult. The terrain was harsh. The local peoples were fierce warriors. They used hit-and-run tactics. They were difficult to pin down in battle. But Cyrus adapted his strategy. He used diplomacy as much as force. He made alliances with local chiefs. He offered them positions in his administration. This approach was more effective than pure conquest. The eastern expansion brought the Persians to the borders of India. It also gave them control of the Silk Road trade routes. These routes connected China with the Mediterranean world. Control of this trade brought enormous wealth. Cyrus founded cities in these eastern regions. These cities served as administrative centers. They also spread Persian culture and ideas. The most famous was probably Psychropolis, named after Cyrus himself. Death of Cyrus the Great. Cyrus died in 530 BC during a campaign against the Massagetae. The Massagetae were a nomadic people who lived north of the Oxus River in modern Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. According to Herodotus, the Massagetae were ruled by Queen Tomyris. When Cyrus demanded her submission, she refused. War became inevitable. The campaign started well for the Persians. They won an initial battle. Tomyris's son was captured and killed himself in captivity. This enraged the queen. She vowed revenge. In the final battle, the Massagetae defeated the Persian army. Cyrus was killed in the fighting. Tomyris found his body. According to legend, she filled a skin bag with blood and dipped Cyrus's head in it, saying he could finally have his fill of blood. This was a shocking end for the great conqueror. But Cyrus had already built something that would outlast him. The Persian Empire was now too large and too well organized to collapse with one man's death. Cyrus was buried at Pasargadae, his capital city. His tomb still stands today. It is a simple stone structure. The inscription reportedly read, "I am Cyrus, King of Kings. I founded this empire, and I begrudge no one this monument." Cambyses II and the conquest of Egypt. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, became king in 530 BC. He inherited a vast empire, but he also inherited his father's ambitions. Cambyses looked toward Egypt, the last great independent kingdom in the region. Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Amasis II. Egypt was wealthy and well defended. The Nile River provided natural protection. The Egyptian army was experienced. They had Greek mercenaries. They had a strong navy. But Egypt also had weaknesses. The country was divided between native Egyptians and a Greek-influenced elite. Many Egyptians were unhappy with foreign influence. Some were ready to welcome new rulers. Cambyses prepared carefully for the Egyptian campaign. He secured alliances with Arab tribes. These tribes controlled the desert routes to Egypt. Without their help, a Persian army could not cross the Sinai Desert. He also negotiated with Polycrates, the tyrant of Samos. Polycrates provided ships for the Persian fleet. This gave Cambyses naval support for his invasion. In 525 BC, Cambyses launched his attack. The decisive battle was fought at Pelusium, near the mouth of the Nile. The Egyptians fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Pharaoh Psamtik III was captured. Memphis, the Egyptian capital, surrendered. Egypt became a Persian province. The conquest added enormous wealth to the Persian treasury. Persian administration of Egypt. Cambyses ruled Egypt as pharaoh. He adopted Egyptian royal titles. He performed traditional ceremonies. This showed respect for Egyptian culture. It also helped legitimize his rule. But Cambyses also made changes. He reduced the power of Egyptian priests. He cut their incomes. He transferred some temple lands to Persian nobles. These policies created resentment. Cambyses also attempted to conquer Nubia and the Ethiopian kingdom of Kush. These campaigns were less successful. The desert was difficult to cross. Supply lines were stretched. Many soldiers died from thirst and heat. According to Herodotus, Cambyses became increasingly unstable during his time in Egypt. He supposedly killed the sacred Apis bull. He opened ancient tombs. He showed disrespect for Egyptian religion. Modern historians question these stories. They may have been Egyptian propaganda. Cambyses ruled Egypt for 7 years. During this time, the country was generally peaceful and prosperous. The false Smyrtis rebellion. In 522 BC, while Cambyses was still in Egypt, a rebellion broke out in Persia. A man claiming to be Bardia, Cambyses' brother, seized the throne. He announced that he was the rightful king. This created a crisis. Cambyses had supposedly killed Bardia years earlier, but the rebellion claimed that Bardia was still alive. The rebels said that an impostor had been killed instead. The rebel king is known to history as the false Smyrtis, or Gaumata. He was probably a Median priest who resembled Bardia. He promised to reduce taxes. He freed slaves. These popular policies won him support. Cambyses immediately began marching back to Persia, but he died on the journey. The exact cause is unknown. Some say he died from an infected wound. Others suggest suicide or assassination. With Cambyses dead, the false Smerdis controlled the entire Persian Empire. He ruled for 7 months. During this time, he tried to reverse many of Cyrus's policies. He favored Iranian nobles over foreign administrators, but not everyone accepted his legitimacy. A group of Persian nobles began plotting against him. They believed he was an impostor. They felt that the Achaemenid dynasty was in danger. Darius and the conspiracy. The leader of the conspiracy was Darius, a young Persian noble. Darius came from a cadet branch of the Achaemenid family. He was related to Cyrus, but not closely. He was about 28 years old. Darius gathered 6 other conspirators. All were from prominent Persian families. They included Intiphernes, Otanes, Gobryas, Hydarnes, Megabyzus, and Aspathenes. These men would later become the most powerful nobles in the empire. The conspirators had to act carefully. The false Smerdis was protected by guards. He lived in a heavily fortified palace. Direct assault seemed impossible. But they had inside information. They knew that the false Smerdis rarely appeared in public. He conducted business through intermediaries. This secrecy actually made people suspicious. The conspirators also claimed to have proof that he was an impostor. They said that the real Bardia had distinctive physical features. The false Smerdis supposedly lacked these features. On September 29, 52 BC, the 7 conspirators entered the palace. They claimed to have urgent business with the king. Once inside, they confronted the false Smerdis. A fight broke out. The false Smerdis was killed. Darius becomes king. With the false Smerdis dead, the conspirators had to decide who would become king. According to Herodotus, they agreed to let fate decide. They would meet at sunrise. Whoever's horse neighed first would become king. Darius's groom had a clever plan. The night before, he had the groom's horse mate with a mare at the meeting spot. When the horses gathered in the morning, Darius's horse recognized the scent. It neighed first. This story is probably legend. The truth was likely more political. Darius had the strongest claim to the throne among the conspirators. He was also the most capable leader. Darius faced immediate challenges. His claim to the throne was weak. He was not a direct descendant of Cyrus. Many people throughout the empire refused to accept his rule. Rebellions broke out across the empire. In Babylon, a man named Nid-2-Bel claimed to be Nebuchadnezzar III. In Media, another pretender claimed the throne. Similar rebellions erupted in Parthia, Margiana, and Satagedia. Darius had to fight for his throne. The next 2 years would test whether the Persian Empire would survive or fragment into many kingdoms. The Great Rebellions. The year 522-520 BC was the most dangerous period in early Persian history. Darius faced rebellions in almost every province. If he failed to suppress them quickly, the empire would disintegrate. Darius showed remarkable military and political skill. He divided his forces. He sent armies to different regions simultaneously. He also used propaganda effectively. He claimed that Ahura Mazda, the Persian god, had chosen him to rule. The Babylonian rebellion was particularly serious. Babylon was wealthy and strategically important. The rebel Nid-2-Bel had significant support, but Darius moved quickly. He besieged Babylon and captured the city after several months. In Media, the rebellion was led by a man named Phraates. He claimed to be a descendant of the old Median royal family. This rebellion was dangerous because Media was close to the Persian heartland. Darius defeated Phraates in battle. According to the Behistun inscription, Phraates was captured and executed. His supporters were crucified as a warning to other rebels. The eastern rebellions took longer to suppress. The distances were vast. Communication was slow, but Darius's generals were capable. They defeated the rebels one by one. By 518 BC, all major rebellions were crushed. Darius had proven his authority. The empire was united again under Achaemenid rule. The Behistun inscription. To commemorate his victories, Darius commissioned a massive inscription. It was carved into a cliff face at Behistun in western Iran. The inscription was placed 100 meters above the ground. This made it nearly impossible to alter or destroy. The Behistun inscription is written in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. This reflected the diversity of Darius's empire. It also ensured that people throughout the empire could read his message. The inscription tells Darius's version of events. It describes how he defeated the false Smerdis. It lists all the rebellions he suppressed. It emphasizes that Ahura Mazda supported him. The inscription also includes images. It shows Darius receiving the submission of defeated rebels. The false Smerdis lies beneath Darius's feet. Other rebels are shown bound with ropes around their necks. This was more than just propaganda. It was a statement about Persian royal ideology. Darius was presenting himself as the chosen of Ahura Mazda. He was claiming divine support for his rule. The Behistun inscription became the Rosetta Stone of cuneiform studies. In the 19th century, scholars used it to decipher ancient Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian texts. Administrative reforms of Darius. With the rebellions crushed, Darius turned to reorganizing the empire. The Persian Empire was now the largest the world had ever seen. It needed new systems of government. The old tribal structures were no longer adequate. Darius was a brilliant administrator. He understood that ruling diverse peoples required flexibility. He also knew that efficient communication was essential. An empire this size could not be ruled from a single palace. His first reform was the creation of the satrap system. The empire was divided into provinces called satrapies. Each satrapy was governed by a satrap, or provincial governor. Most satraps were Persian nobles, but some were local rulers who had submitted to Persian authority. The satrap system solved many problems. It allowed for local administration while maintaining central control. Satraps understood local customs and languages. They could respond quickly to local problems, but they also reported to the king. Darius established about 20 satrapies initially. Each had defined borders and responsibilities. The satrapies varied greatly in size and importance. Some, like Babylonia, were wealthy and densely populated. Others, like Gandhara, were frontier regions with smaller populations. Each satrapy had to pay annual tribute to the king. This tribute was set in advance. It was based on the satrapy's wealth and population. This system was more efficient than the older practice of irregular tribute collection. The tribute system provided the empire with steady income. It funded the royal court, the army, and public works projects. It also encouraged economic development. Provinces that increased their wealth could often negotiate lower tribute rates. Darius also standardized weights and measures throughout the empire. This made trade easier. Merchants no longer had to convert between different systems in each region. Standard measures reduced disputes and increased commerce. The satrap system in detail. The satrap system was Darius's greatest administrative achievement. It balanced central control with local autonomy. This balance allowed the Persian Empire to survive for over 2 centuries. Each satrap was essentially a provincial king. He had wide powers within his territory. He collected taxes. He maintained order. He raised troops when needed. He administered justice according to local customs. But satraps were also carefully controlled. They served at the pleasure of the king. They could be removed or transferred at any time. They were required to visit the royal court regularly. This kept them loyal and informed them of royal policies. Darius created a system of checks and balances. In each satrapy, there were multiple officials who reported directly to the king. The military commander was separate from the satrap. The treasurer was also independent. This prevented any one person from gaining too much power. The king also sent inspectors throughout the empire. These officials were called the king's eyes and ears. They traveled secretly. They reported on the performance of satraps and other officials. They ensured that royal orders were being followed. Some of the most important satrapies included Lydia in western Anatolia, Babylon in Mesopotamia, and Egypt. These provinces were wealthy and strategically important. Their satraps were usually close relatives or trusted friends of the king. Frontier satrapies like Bactria and Sogdiana had different challenges. They faced constant raids from nomadic tribes. Their satraps needed to be skilled military commanders. They also needed diplomatic skills to negotiate with tribal leaders. The satrap system allowed for remarkable diversity within the empire. In Egypt, the satrap ruled as pharaoh. In Babylon, he participated in traditional Babylonian ceremonies. In Lydia, he worked with Greek city councils. This flexibility was key to Persian success. Local laws and customs were generally preserved. The Persians did not impose a uniform legal code. Instead, they allowed each region to maintain its traditional practices. This reduced resistance to Persian rule. Persian road network. Darius understood that a vast empire needed good communications. He ordered the construction of a network of roads throughout Persian territory. These roads connected all major cities and administrative centers. The most famous of these was the Royal Road. It stretched from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in southwestern Iran. The total distance was about 2,500 kilometers. This road connected the western and eastern parts of the empire. The Royal Road was not just a simple dirt track. It was carefully engineered. It had bridges over rivers. It had way stations for travelers. It had warehouses for storing supplies. Most importantly, it had a system of mounted messengers. The Persian messenger system was revolutionary. Relay stations were placed every 25 to 30 kilometers along major roads. Fresh horses were always available at these stations. Messages could travel the entire length of the Royal Road in just 7 days. This was incredibly fast for the ancient world. Without the messenger system, a journey from Sardis to Susa would take 3 months on foot. With relays, urgent messages could reach their destination in a week. The messenger system served multiple purposes. It allowed the king to communicate quickly with his satraps. It enabled rapid mobilization of troops in emergencies. It also facilitated trade and commerce throughout the empire. The roads were maintained by local communities. Each region was responsible for the roads passing through its territory. This distributed the cost of maintenance. It also ensured that roads were kept in good condition. Guard posts were established at regular intervals along major roads. These protected travelers from bandits. They also monitored movement throughout the empire. Suspicious travelers could be detained and questioned. The road network facilitated cultural exchange throughout the empire. Ideas, technologies, and artistic styles spread along these routes. The roads helped create a shared Persian imperial culture while preserving local traditions. Trade flourished along the Persian roads. Merchants could travel safely from India to Greece. Luxury goods from China reached Mediterranean markets. This trade generated enormous wealth for the empire. Construction of Persepolis. Around 515 BC, Darius began construction of a new ceremonial capital. He chose a site in the Persian heartland, about 60 kilometers northeast of the city of Shiraz. This new capital would be called Persepolis, meaning City of the Persians. Persepolis was designed to showcase Persian power and wealth. It was not primarily a residential city. Instead, it was a ceremonial center where the king received tribute and held court ceremonies. Construction continued for over 50 years, through the reigns of several kings. The site chosen for Persepolis was symbolic. It was located in Fars, the original Persian homeland. This emphasized the Persian identity of the empire. It also placed the new capital in a defensible mountain location. The centerpiece of Persepolis was a massive raised platform. This platform, called the Takht-i-Jamshid, was carved from the natural rock of the mountainside. It rose 15 meters above the surrounding plain. The platform was large enough to hold multiple palaces and ceremonial buildings. Access to the platform was through a grand staircase. This staircase was wide enough for 10 horses to climb side by side. The staircase was decorated with relief sculptures showing representatives from all parts of the empire, bringing tribute to the king. The Apadana, or audience hall, was the largest building on the platform. It could hold 10,000 people. The roof was supported by 72 columns, each 20 meters tall. The columns were topped with carved capitals, showing bulls, lions, and eagles. The reliefs at Persepolis show the diversity of the Persian Empire. They depict people from all the satrapies bringing gifts to the king. Egyptians bring gold and exotic animals. Indians bring ivory and spices. Scythians bring horses and precious metals. The Apadana reliefs also show Persian nobles and guards. The Persian nobles are shown in their distinctive court dress, long robes, tall hats, and curved daggers. The guards carry spears and shields. They represent the military power that protected the empire. Other important buildings at Persepolis included the treasury, where tribute was stored, and the Takara, Darius's private palace. There was also a throne hall called the 100-column hall, built by later kings. The construction of Persepolis required enormous resources. Stone was quarried from the mountains. Precious materials were imported from throughout the empire. Skilled craftsmen came from Babylon, Egypt, and other provinces. Persian religious policies. Religion played a crucial role in Persian imperial policy. The Persians themselves worshipped Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. This was the supreme god of Zoroastrianism, a religion that had developed in ancient Iran. Zoroastrianism was founded by the prophet Zarathustra, also called Zoroaster. Zarathustra taught that there was one supreme god, Ahura Mazda. This god was in conflict with Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Humans had to choose between good and evil. The Persian kings saw themselves as servants of Ahura Mazda. They claimed that Ahura Mazda had chosen them to rule. This gave them divine legitimacy. It also obligated them to rule justly and protect the truth. But the Persians did not impose their religion on conquered peoples. This was unusual in the ancient world. Most conquerors tried to spread their own gods. The Persians took a different approach. They allowed conquered peoples to keep their traditional religions. They often supported the rebuilding of temples. They participated in local religious ceremonies. This policy won them loyalty from subject peoples. In Babylon, Cyrus and his successors patronized the cult of Marduk. They participated in the New Year festival. They restored damaged temples. They presented themselves as chosen by Marduk to rule Babylon. In Egypt, Persian kings ruled as pharaohs. They performed traditional Egyptian ceremonies. They built temples to Egyptian gods. They respected the complex religious traditions of Egypt. This religious tolerance was more than just political calculation. It reflected Persian values about the nature of truth and divine will. Zoroastrianism taught that good thoughts, good words, and good deeds were universally important. These could be found in many religions. The Persian policy of religious tolerance had important historical consequences. It allowed Judaism to survive and flourish during the Persian period. It preserved Egyptian and Babylonian religious traditions. It facilitated cultural exchange throughout the empire. Some Persian religious practices did spread throughout the empire. The Persian calendar was widely adopted. Persian fire altars were built in many provinces, but these were often blended with local traditions rather than replacing them. The Ionian Revolt. The first major challenge to Persian expansion came from an unexpected source, the Greek cities of Ionia. These cities were located on the western coast of Anatolia. They had been conquered by Cyrus during his campaign against Lydia. Initially, the Ionian Greeks had accepted Persian rule without much resistance. The Persians allowed them to maintain their traditional governments. Trade continued to flourish under Persian protection. Many Greek tyrants actually prospered under Persian rule. But by the end of the 6th century BC, tensions were rising. Some Ionians resented paying tribute to the Persian king. Others disliked being ruled by Persian-appointed tyrants. Democratic movements were growing in many Greek cities. The immediate cause of the revolt was a failed expedition to Naxos. In 499 BC, Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletos, had requested Persian help to conquer the island of Naxos. The expedition failed, Aristagoras feared he would be blamed by the Persian king. To save his position, Aristagoras made a dramatic decision. He renounced his tyranny and proclaimed democracy in Miletos. He then called on other Ionian cities to revolt against Persian rule. This was the beginning of the Ionian Revolt. The revolt spread quickly throughout the Greek cities of Anatolia. The rebels drove out Persian-appointed tyrants. They established democratic governments. They began coordinating military efforts against Persian forces in the region. The Ionians knew they could not defeat the Persians alone. They sent envoys to mainland Greece, asking for help. Sparta, the most powerful Greek city, refused to help, but Athens and Eretria agreed to send military support. In 498 BC, a combined force of Ionians, Athenians, and Eretrians attacked Sardis, the capital of the Lydian satrapy. They captured the city and burned it. This was a major victory for the rebels and a serious humiliation for the Persians. But the victory at Sardis was short-lived. Persian forces quickly regrouped. The Greek expedition retreated to the coast. The Athenians and Eretrians returned home, leaving the Ionians to face Persian retaliation alone. Persian response and consequences. Darius was furious about the attack on Sardis. According to Herodotus, he shot an arrow into the air and prayed to be able to punish the Athenians. He ordered a servant to remind him 3 times each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." The Persian response to the revolt was methodical and devastating. Darius appointed his son-in-law Mardonius to command the campaign. Fresh troops were brought from throughout the empire. The Persian fleet was mobilized to support land operations. The Persians began reconquering the rebel cities one by one. They showed little mercy to those who had participated in the revolt. Cities that surrendered were usually spared. Cities that resisted were often destroyed, their populations enslaved or deported. The decisive battle came in 494 BC near the island of Lad. A massive Persian fleet confronted the combined Ionian navy. The Ionians had assembled over 350 ships, but they were not united in their strategy or leadership. During the battle, several Ionian contingents defected to the Persians. Others fled without fighting. The remaining Ionian ships were overwhelmed and defeated. This naval defeat effectively ended the revolt. After the Battle of Lade, the Persians besieged Miletos, the leader of the revolt. The city held out for several months, but without naval support, its position was hopeless. Miletos finally fell. The city was destroyed. Its surviving population was deported to Mesopotamia. By 493 BC, the Ionian revolt was completely crushed. Persian control over western Anatolia was restored. But the rebellion had important consequences. It demonstrated that Greek military tactics could be effective against Persian forces. It also showed Persian vulnerability to naval attacks. More importantly, the revolt convinced Darius that mainland Greece was a threat to Persian interests. As long as Athens and other Greek cities remained independent, they could support future rebellions in the Persian Empire. The stage was set for the Persian Wars. Preparations for the Greek campaign. After suppressing the Ionian revolt, Darius began planning an invasion of mainland Greece. This would not be a simple punitive expedition. It would be a full-scale conquest aimed at adding Greece to the Persian Empire. The Persian war machine was formidable. The empire could draw troops from dozens of different peoples. Each group had its own military specialties. The Persians themselves were skilled archers and cavalry. The Medes were excellent horsemen. The Scythians were famous for their archery. Persian military engineers were among the best in the ancient world. They could build bridges across rivers. They could construct siege equipment. They could dig tunnels under city walls. These technical skills gave Persian armies significant advantages. The Persian fleet was also impressive. It included ships from Phoenicia, Egypt, and the Greek cities of Ionia. The Phoenicians were particularly skilled sailors. They provided the technical expertise for complex naval operations. Logistics were a Persian strength. The empire's road network allowed for rapid movement of troops and supplies. The administrative system could organize provisions for large armies. Local officials were required to provide food and shelter for passing troops. But the Greeks also had advantages. They were fighting on their home territory. They knew the local terrain. They could retreat to defensible positions in the mountains. They also had superior infantry tactics. Greek hoplites fought in tight formations called phalanxes. Each hoplite carried a large shield, a long spear, and wore bronze armor. When properly deployed, a phalanx was very difficult to break. The Persians had no direct equivalent to the hoplite phalanx. The Greeks were also politically motivated. They were fighting for their independence and their way of life. Persian soldiers were often fighting for pay or because they had been conscripted. This difference in motivation would prove important in the coming battles. The First Persian Invasion, Marathon Campaign. In 492 BC, Darius launched the first invasion of Greece. He appointed his son-in-law Mardonius to command the expedition. The army was transported by ship across the northern Aegean Sea. The plan was to march through Thrace and into central Greece. But the expedition encountered problems from the start. A storm destroyed many ships near Mount Athos. Thracian tribes attacked the army as it marched overland. Mardonius himself was wounded in a night attack. The expedition was forced to retreat. Darius was undeterred by this setback. In 490 BC, he organized a second invasion. This time, he chose a different route. Instead of marching overland, the Persian army would sail directly across the Aegean Sea. The targets were Athens and Eretria. The expedition was commanded by Artaphernes and Datis. They had explicit orders to capture Athens and Eretria. The populations of these cities were to be brought back to Persia as slaves. This would punish them for supporting the Ionian revolt. The Persian fleet first attacked Eretria. The city was besieged for 6 days. On the 7th day, traders opened the gates. The Persians captured the city. The population was enslaved, just as Darius had ordered. Next, the Persian fleet sailed to Attica. They landed at Marathon, a plain about 40 kilometers northeast of Athens. This location was chosen because it was suitable for cavalry operations. The Persians expected their superior numbers and cavalry to overwhelm the Greeks. The Athenians quickly mobilized their army. They sent a runner named Phidippides to Sparta asking for help, but the Spartans said they could not march until after a religious festival. Only the small city of Plataea sent troops to help Athens. The Athenian army, commanded by Miltiades, marched to Marathon. They took up positions in the hills overlooking the plain. The two armies faced each other for several days. Neither side wanted to attack first. Finally, Miltiades decided to attack. He arranged his hoplites in an unusual formation. The center was thin, but the wings were strengthened. When the Persians attacked the weak center, the strong Greek wings would encircle them. The Battle of Marathon, was fought on September 12, 490 BC. It was one of the most famous battles in ancient history. The outcome would determine whether Greece remained independent or became part of the Persian Empire. The Persian army numbered about 25,000 men. Most were infantry armed with spears, bows, and light shields. There was also a significant cavalry force. The Persian commanders expected an easy victory against the smaller Greek force. The Greek army had only about 11,000 men. About 10,000 were Athenians. The remaining 1,000 were from Plataea. But the Greeks had advantages in equipment and training. Their bronze armor was superior to Persian equipment. Their long spears outreached Persian weapons. Miltiades waited until the Persian cavalry had been withdrawn, probably to be loaded back onto ships. Then he ordered the attack. The Greek phalanx charged across the plain at a run. This surprised the Persians, who were not expecting such aggressive tactics. The battle unfolded exactly as Miltiades had planned. The Persian center advanced against the thin Greek center, but as the Persians pushed forward, the strong Greek wings closed in from both sides. The Persian army was surrounded. Panic spread through the Persian ranks. Soldiers began fleeing toward their ships, but the beach was crowded and many ships were not ready to sail. The Greeks pursued the fleeing Persians. Hundreds were killed as they tried to reach their ships. The Persian losses were heavy. According to Greek sources, 6,400 Persians died at Marathon. Greek losses were minimal. Only 192 Athenians were killed. These numbers may be exaggerated, but they show the completeness of the Greek victory. 7 Persian ships were captured. The rest of the fleet sailed away. The invasion of mainland Greece had failed. For the first time, a Persian army had been decisively defeated by European opponents. Aftermath of Marathon. The victory at Marathon had profound effects on both Greece and Persia. For the Greeks, it proved that the Persians could be defeated. It gave them confidence to resist future Persian invasions. It also established Athens as a major power in Greece. The Athenians celebrated their victory with great pride. They built a monument to the 1,900 dead at Marathon. They established an annual festival to commemorate the battle. The victory became part of Athenian national identity. According to legend, a messenger ran from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory. He collapsed and died after delivering the news. This story inspired the modern marathon race. However, historians doubt that this actually happened. For the Persians, the defeat at Marathon was a serious setback, but not a disaster. They had lost a relatively small army. The empire itself was not threatened, but Persian prestige had been damaged. Darius was determined to avenge the defeat. The failure at Marathon showed that Greek military tactics were effective against Persian forces. The hoplite phalanx had proven superior to Persian infantry. Persian cavalry, their usual advantage, had been neutralized by the terrain and tactics. Darius immediately began planning a much larger invasion of Greece. The next campaign would not be a simple punitive expedition. It would be a massive effort to conquer all of Greece and add it permanently to the Persian Empire. But Darius would not live to lead this campaign. In 486 BC, rebellion broke out in Egypt. The Egyptians had been planning revolt for years. They saw the Persian defeat at Marathon as a sign of weakness. Darius marched to Egypt to suppress the rebellion. The Egyptian campaign was successful. The rebellion was crushed. Egypt remained a Persian province, but the effort exhausted Darius. In 486 BC, at the age of 64, Darius died. He had ruled the Persian Empire for 36 years. His son Xerxes would inherit the throne and the plan to conquer Greece. Xerxes ascends to the throne. When Darius died in 486 BC, his son Xerxes became king. Xerxes was about 35 years old. He had been groomed for leadership from childhood. His mother was Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great. This gave Xerxes strong legitimacy as heir to the Persian throne. Xerxes was physically imposing. Ancient sources describe him as very tall and handsome. He had the bearing of a king, but he was also known for his quick temper. He could be generous to friends and ruthless to enemies. The new king inherited a stable empire. Darius had created efficient administrative systems. The satrap network functioned well. The royal roads enabled quick communication. The treasury was full of tribute from wealthy provinces. But Xerxes also inherited problems. Egypt had rebelled during the final years of Darius's reign. The rebellion had been suppressed, but resentment remained. There was also unrest in Babylonia. Some nobles questioned Persian rule. Xerxes' first priority was securing his position. He executed potential rivals within the royal family. He replaced some satraps with his own supporters. He made generous donations to temples throughout the empire. These actions consolidated his power. The new king was determined to complete his father's unfinished business. Darius had planned a massive invasion of Greece. This invasion had been postponed due to the Egyptian rebellion. Now Xerxes would make it happen. Xerxes saw the Greek campaign as essential. The defeat at Marathon had damaged Persian prestige. Greek independence encouraged rebellion in other parts of the empire. The Persians needed to demonstrate their power through a decisive victory. Preparing the great invasion. Xerxes spent 4 years preparing for the invasion of Greece. This would be the largest military expedition in ancient history. The king was determined not to repeat the mistakes of the Marathon campaign. The first challenge was assembling the army. Contingents were ordered from every part of the empire. The Persian heartland provided the core troops, but soldiers also came from Media, Assyria, Egypt, and dozens of other regions. According to Herodotus, the Persian army numbered 1.7 million fighting men, plus an equal number of support personnel. Modern historians consider these numbers exaggerated. The actual army probably numbered around 200,000 men, but this was still enormous by ancient standards. The diversity of the Persian army was remarkable. Each people contributed their traditional military specialties. The Persians and Medes provided heavy cavalry and archers. The Scythians brought light cavalry and horse archers. The Egyptians contributed infantry and naval forces. Some troops were more reliable than others. The Persian and Median contingents were highly motivated and well-equipped. They formed the elite core of the army. Troops from recently conquered regions were less trustworthy. Some might defect if the campaign went badly. The Persian fleet was equally impressive. Ships came from Phoenicia, Egypt, Cyprus, and the Greek cities of Ionia. The Phoenicians provided the technical expertise. They were the finest sailors in the ancient world. Their ships were fast and maneuverable. Logistics posed enormous challenges. An army of this size consumed vast quantities of food and water daily. Supply depots were established along the route of march. Local governors were ordered to stockpile provisions. Special ships carried additional supplies. Xerxes also undertook major engineering projects. A canal was dug through the Athos Peninsula. This would allow ships to avoid the treacherous waters where Mardonius's fleet had been wrecked. The canal took 3 years to complete and employed thousands of workers. The bridge across the Hellespont, the most ambitious engineering project, was bridging the Hellespont. This narrow strait separated Europe from Asia. It was about 1.5 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. No army had ever crossed this body of water on bridges. Xerxes ordered his engineers to build not one, but 2 parallel bridges. The bridges would allow the entire army to cross safely. They would also provide a secure line of retreat if necessary. The bridges were marvels of ancient engineering. They were supported by hundreds of ships, anchored side by side. Heavy cables made of papyrus and flax were stretched between the ships. Wooden planks were laid across the cables to form a roadway. The construction faced many challenges. The Hellespont was subject to strong currents and sudden storms. The bridges had to be flexible enough to withstand these forces. Special anchoring systems kept the supporting ships in position. According to Herodotus, the first bridges were destroyed by a storm. Xerxes was furious. He ordered the sea to be whipped 300 times as punishment. He also had the engineers executed. This story shows Xerxes' legendary temper, though it may be exaggerated. New bridges were built with improved designs. They successfully supported the passage of the entire Persian army. The crossing took 7 days and nights. Xerxes himself crossed on foot, accompanied by his elite guards. The bridges became symbols of Persian power and ambition. They demonstrated that the Persians could overcome any natural obstacle. They also showed Xerxes' determination to conquer Greece at any cost. But the bridges also revealed Persian weaknesses. The enormous expense and effort required showed the limits of Persian resources. The delays caused by engineering problems gave the Greeks more time to prepare their defenses. Greek preparations and unity. The Greeks had been preparing for the Persian invasion since Marathon. They knew that Xerxes would return with a much larger army. This time, the survival of Greek civilization was at stake. The first challenge for the Greeks was achieving unity. Greece was not a single country. It was a collection of independent city-states. These cities often fought among themselves. They had different forms of government and competing interests. But the Persian threat forced unprecedented cooperation. In 41 BC, representatives from major Greek cities met at Corinth. They formed the Hellenic League, a military alliance against Persia. This was the first time most Greek cities had worked together. Sparta took the leadership of the alliance. This was natural, as Sparta had the most powerful army in Greece. The Spartan king Leonidas was chosen as commander of the Greek land forces. The Athenian Themistocles would lead the combined Greek fleet. Not all Greek cities joined the alliance. Some remained neutral. Others, particularly in northern Greece, submitted to Persian rule. They calculated that resistance was hopeless. This reduced the forces available to defend Greece. The Greeks had significant disadvantages. Their total military forces were much smaller than the Persian army. They lacked the resources for a prolonged war. Their cities were vulnerable to siege and destruction. But the Greeks also had important advantages. They were fighting on familiar terrain. They could choose defensive positions that favored their tactics. Their hoplite infantry was superior to Persian foot soldiers in close combat. The Greeks also had superior naval tactics. Their warships, called triremes, were faster and more maneuverable than most Persian vessels. Greek crews were better trained in ramming tactics. The narrow waters around Greece favored the smaller Greek fleet. Most importantly, the Greeks were fighting for their independence. They knew that defeat would mean slavery or death. This motivation gave them courage to face impossible odds. The march through Europe. In the spring of 480 BC, Xerxes began his march toward Greece. The Persian army crossed the bridges over the Hellespont without significant problems. The sight of this massive force must have been awe-inspiring and terrifying. The army marched along the coast of Thrace. The fleet sailed parallel to the army, providing supplies and protection. This coordination between land and sea forces was a Persian strength. It allowed the army to operate far from its bases. Greek cities in northern Greece submitted without resistance. They provided food and guides for the Persian army. Some even contributed troops to Xerxes' forces. The speed of these submissions alarmed the Greeks further south. The Persian advance seemed unstoppable. City after city opened its gates to avoid destruction. The sheer size of the Persian force intimidated potential opponents. Many Greeks began to doubt that resistance was possible. But the Persian army also faced problems. The size that intimidated enemies also created logistical difficulties. Finding enough food and water for hundreds of thousands of men was challenging. The army moved slowly due to its enormous size. Disease began affecting the troops. Large concentrations of men in unsanitary conditions bred illness. Many soldiers died from disease rather than combat. The Persian advantage in numbers was gradually eroding. The Greeks used the time to complete their preparations. They fortified key positions along the Persian route. They evacuated civilians from threatened areas. They concentrated their forces at carefully chosen defensive positions. The Pass of Thermopylae. The Greeks decided to make their first stand at Thermopylae. This was a narrow pass between the mountains and the sea in central Greece. The pass was only about 15 meters wide at its narrowest point. A small force could potentially hold it against a much larger army. King Leonidas of Sparta led the Greek force at Thermopylae. He brought 300 Spartan warriors, all veterans of many battles. These were joined by about 7,000 troops from other Greek cities. The total Greek force was tiny compared to the Persian army. The position at Thermopylae was strong but not impregnable. The narrow pass prevented the Persians from using their numerical advantage. But there were mountain paths that could potentially outflank the Greek position. Leonidas was aware of these paths. He stationed troops to guard them. But he did not have enough men to watch all possible routes. The Greeks were gambling that they could hold the pass long enough for political negotiations. When Xerxes arrived at Thermopylae, he was shocked by the small size of the Greek force. He expected the Greeks to retreat when they saw his massive army. Instead, the Spartans began preparing for battle. They combed their hair and exercised, following their traditional pre-battle rituals. Xerxes sent a herald, demanding Greek surrender. The herald told Leonidas that Persian arrows would be so numerous they would block out the sun. A Spartan warrior supposedly replied, "Then we will fight in the shade." This epitomized the Spartan attitude toward impossible odds. For 3 days, Xerxes waited for the Greeks to surrender. He could not believe they would actually fight against such overwhelming numbers. Finally, he ordered his troops to attack. The Battle of Thermopylae was about to begin. The Battle of Thermopylae. The battle began with Persian archers shooting volleys of arrows at the Greek line. The Greeks raised their shields and waited. The bronze-faced shields deflected most arrows. The phalanx formation protected the warriors behind their shields. Then Xerxes sent in his infantry. Wave after wave of Persian soldiers attacked the Greek line. But the narrow pass prevented them from surrounding the Greeks. They had to attack head-on against the strongest part of the phalanx. The Greek hoplites were superior in close combat. Their long spears outreached Persian weapons. Their bronze armor protected them from Persian arrows and spears. Most importantly, they fought as a coordinated unit. The Persians fought bravely, but individually. Each warrior sought personal glory. The Greeks fought as a team. When one man fell, another stepped forward to fill the gap. The phalanx remained unbroken. On the first day of fighting, the Persians made no progress. Hundreds of their soldiers died trying to break the Greek line. The Greeks lost very few men. It seemed like the pass was truly impregnable. On the second day, Xerxes sent in his elite troops. The Immortals were the finest soldiers in the Persian army. They were called Immortals because their unit was always kept at exactly 10,000 men. When one died, another immediately replaced him. But even the Immortals could not break the Greek line. The narrow pass neutralized their superior numbers. The Greek spears and shields were too effective. By the end of the second day, Persian morale was declining. Then disaster struck the Greeks. A local Greek named Ephialtes approached Xerxes. He offered to guide Persian troops along a mountain path that would bring them behind the Greek position. In exchange, he wanted a reward from the Persian king. Xerxes immediately accepted this offer. He sent a force of Immortals with Ephialtes as their guide. They marched through the mountains during the night. By dawn, they would be behind the Greek line. The final stand. Leonidas learned of the flanking movement from scouts. He realized that his position was no longer defensible. The Persians would soon attack from both front and rear. The Greeks would be surrounded and destroyed. Most of the Greek allies were dismissed. Leonidas told them to return to their cities and prepare defenses there. There was no point in having them all die at Thermopylae. Their cities would need defenders later. But Leonidas and his 300 Spartans remained. They were joined by about 1,000 volunteers from Thebes and Thespae. These men chose to stay and fight to the death. They knew they would not survive. On the third morning, the final battle began. The Persians attacked from both directions. The Greeks formed a circle and fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Leonidas was killed early in the fighting. The battle then centered around his body. Both sides fought to control the corpse of the Spartan king. The fighting was savage and desperate. One by one, the Greeks fell. They fought until their spears broke, then used their swords. When their swords broke, they fought with rocks and their bare hands. But eventually all were killed. The Battle of Thermopylae was over. The Persians had won, but at enormous cost. Thousands of Persian soldiers had died. The 3 days of fighting had delayed the Persian advance and damaged their morale. More importantly, the battle became a symbol of Greek courage. The story of the 300 Spartans who chose death over surrender inspired all of Greece. It showed that Persians could be fought and made to pay a heavy price for victory. Aftermath and Persian advance. After Thermopylae, the Persian army resumed its march toward Athens. The Greeks had no forces capable of stopping them in open battle. City after city surrendered or was abandoned as the Persians approached. The Athenians faced a terrible decision. Their city could not be defended against the Persian army. They could surrender and hope for mercy, or they could evacuate and continue fighting. The debate in the Athenian assembly was fierce. Themistocles, the Athenian leader, convinced the citizens to evacuate Athens. The population would be transported to the island of Salamis and other safe locations. The city would be abandoned to the Persians, but the fight would continue. The evacuation of Athens was a massive undertaking. Over 200,000 people had to be moved by ship to safety. Families were separated. Possessions had to be left behind. It was one of the largest refugee movements in ancient history. When the Persians reached Athens, they found it almost empty. Only a few priests and poor people remained in the city. The temples were still standing, including the sacred Parthenon on the Acropolis. Xerxes ordered the city to be burned. Persian soldiers looted and destroyed buildings throughout Athens. The temples were particular targets. This was revenge for the burning of Sardis during the Ionian Revolt. But the destruction of Athens was a hollow victory. The Persian goal was to defeat the Greek people, not just capture territory. By evacuating, the Athenians had preserved their fighting strength. The war was far from over. The Greek strategy was becoming clear. They would avoid pitched battles, where Persian numbers were decisive. Instead, they would fight at sea, where their naval superiority could be used effectively. The naval campaign and Salamis set up. While Xerxes was marching through Greece, the Persian fleet was sailing along the coast. The fleet was supposed to support the army and prevent Greek evacuation by sea, but it faced its own challenges. Greek ships constantly harassed the Persian fleet. They would attack small groups of ships and then retreat. These hit-and-run tactics inflicted steady losses on the Persians. More importantly, they disrupted Persian supply lines. The Persian fleet also suffered from storms. Mediterranean weather in autumn could be treacherous. Several Persian squadrons were wrecked on rocky coasts. The Greeks, who knew local waters better, avoided these dangers. As the Persian fleet approached Athens, it entered the narrow waters around Salamis Island. This was exactly where Themistocles wanted to fight. The confined waters would prevent the Persians from using their numerical advantage. The Persian fleet was still much larger than the Greek navy. It included ships from Phoenicia, Egypt, Cyprus, and other maritime provinces. These crews were experienced sailors. Their ships were well constructed and fast. But the Greek ships had advantages in these waters. The triremes were designed for ramming attacks. Their crews were highly trained in this tactic. The narrow waters around Salamis favored ramming over archery or boarding. Xerxes established his headquarters on a hill overlooking the strait. From there, he could watch the naval battle. He expected to see his fleet destroy the Greek navy. This would end Greek resistance once and for all. The Greeks were desperate. If they lost the naval battle, they would have no way to supply their forces or evacuate their population. The Persian army would then be free to conquer all of Greece. Everything depended on the outcome at Salamis. The Battle of Salamis. The Battle of Salamis was fought on September 27, 480 BC. It was the decisive engagement of the Persian Wars. The outcome would determine whether Greece remained independent or became part of the Persian Empire. Themistocles used a clever strategy to force the battle. He sent a secret message to Xerxes, claiming that the Greeks were planning to retreat during the night. To prevent this, Xerxes ordered his fleet to block all escape routes. The Persian ships moved into position during the night. They surrounded the Greek fleet in the narrow waters around Salamis. When dawn came, the Persians realized they had been tricked. The Greeks were not trying to escape. They were preparing to fight. The battle began at sunrise. The Persian ships advanced in a crowded formation. The narrow straits prevented them from deploying properly. Many ships were packed together so tightly they could barely maneuver. The Greek triremes attacked in line formation. They aimed their bronze rams at the sides of Persian ships. The heavier Greek ships had devastating effects when they struck. Many Persian vessels were holed and sank immediately. The confined waters worked against the Persians. Their superior numbers became a disadvantage. Damaged ships could not retreat without blocking the advance of ships behind them. The Persian formation dissolved into chaos. Greek crews were better trained for this type of fighting. They could maneuver their ships precisely in tight spaces. They coordinated their attacks to maximum effect. The Persian crews, used to fighting in open water, struggled with the conditions. As the battle continued, more Persian ships were sunk or disabled. Survivors swam toward shore or clung to debris. The water was filled with wreckage and bodies. The Persian naval advantage was being destroyed. Victory at Salamis and its consequence. By afternoon, the Persian fleet was in full retreat. Hundreds of their ships had been sunk or captured. The survivors fled toward the open sea. The Greek fleet pursued, capturing more vessels and prisoners. Xerxes watched the disaster from his hillside throne. He saw his supposedly invincible fleet destroyed by the smaller Greek navy. The loss was not just military, but psychological. Persian prestige suffered a devastating blow. The victory at Salamis completely changed the strategic situation. The Persian army in Greece was now isolated. Without naval support, it could not be supplied from Asia. The logistics of maintaining such a large force became impossible. Xerxes made a crucial decision. He would return to Asia with most of his army. A smaller force under Mardonius would remain in Greece for the winter. In spring, Mardonius would resume the campaign with fresher troops and better supply lines. The Persian withdrawal began immediately. Xerxes was afraid that the Greeks might destroy the bridges over the Hellespont. If that happened, his army would be trapped in Europe. He needed to secure his retreat route quickly. The march back to Asia was a disaster. The army that had crossed into Europe in perfect order was now a demoralized mob. Disease and starvation killed thousands of soldiers. Many more deserted along the way. Greek forces harassed the retreating Persians. They attacked supply convoys and isolated units. The Persians had to fight running battles while struggling with logistical problems. It was a humiliating end to the great invasion. For the Greeks, Salamis was more than just a military victory. It proved that the Persian Empire was not invincible. It gave them confidence to continue the war. Most importantly, it preserved Greek independence and civilization. Mardonius and the final campaign. Mardonius spent the winter of 480–479 BC in central Greece. He had about 100,000 troops, mostly Persian and Median veterans. This was still a formidable force, larger than any army the Greeks could assemble. During the winter, Mardonius tried diplomacy. He sent ambassadors to Athens, offering favorable terms for surrender. Athens would be rebuilt at Persian expense. The Athenians would be given privileged status within the Persian Empire. The Athenians rejected these offers. They had sacrificed too much to surrender now. They also knew that other Greek cities were watching. If Athens surrendered, the entire Greek alliance might collapse. In spring 479 BC, Mardonius resumed military operations. He advanced toward Athens, expecting the population to have returned. Instead, he found the city still empty. The Athenians remained on Salamis and other islands. Frustrated by Athenian resistance, Mardonius ordered Athens to be destroyed again. Persian troops demolished buildings that had survived the previous year's destruction. The devastation was more complete this time. But destroying an empty city achieved nothing. Mardonius needed to force a decisive battle. He withdrew to Boeotia, near the city of Thebes. This region favored cavalry operations. Here he would wait for the Greeks to attack. The Greeks were assembling the largest army in their history. Sparta contributed 10,000 hoplites plus support troops. Athens provided 8,000 men despite having no city to defend. Other cities contributed additional forces. The total Greek army numbered about 40,000 hoplites plus light troops. It was commanded by the Spartan regent Pausanias. This would be the final test of strength between Persia and Greece. The Battle of Plataea. The armies met near the town of Plataea in August 479 BC. For days, neither side attacked. Both commanders were waiting for favorable conditions. The Greeks held the high ground. The Persians controlled the water sources. Mardonius had the advantage in cavalry and archers. He used these to harass the Greek position. Persian horsemen attacked Greek supply lines. Archers shot at any Greeks who ventured into the open. The Greeks were running short of water. Their position on the hills was strong defensively but poor logistically. Pausanias decided to retreat to a new position with better access to water. The Greek retreat began at night, but it was poorly coordinated. Units became separated in the darkness. By dawn, the Greek army was scattered across several kilometers. This gave Mardonius his opportunity. The Persian commander ordered an immediate attack. His cavalry and light infantry advanced against the scattered Greek units. It seemed like the Greeks would be defeated in detail before they could reform their lines. But the Spartans and Tegeans, forming the Greek right wing, held their ground. They formed a tight phalanx and prepared to receive the Persian attack. The Athenians on the left also maintained their formation. The battle became a series of separate engagements. The Spartans faced the Persian elite troops, including Mardonius himself. The fighting was intense and desperate. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. Finally, the Spartan phalanx broke through the Persian line. Mardonius was killed in the fighting. With their commander dead, Persian morale collapsed. The army began to retreat toward their fortified camp. Persian defeat and withdrawal. The Persian retreat quickly became a rout. Greek forces pursued the fleeing Persians. The Persian camp was captured after a brief siege. Enormous quantities of treasure and supplies were taken by the Greeks. Persian casualties were heavy. Most of the elite Persian and Median troops were killed or wounded. The survivors fled toward the Hellespont. Many died during the long march back to Asia. The Battle of Plataea ended Persian attempts to conquer Greece. The defeat was so complete that no future Persian king would attempt a major invasion of Europe. The western expansion of the Persian Empire was permanently halted. Greek victory at Plataea was followed by another success at Mycale. On the same day as Plataea, the Greek fleet attacked Persian naval bases in Ionia. The Persian fleet was destroyed, and the Ionian cities rebelled again. The Persian wars were over. Greece had preserved its independence. The Persian Empire, while still vast and powerful, had reached its western limits. The age of Persian expansion was ending. For Xerxes, the Greek expedition was a personal disaster. He had lost enormous resources and prestige. His empire was weakened by the massive expenditure of men and money. Rebellions broke out in other provinces. The Persian Empire would continue for another 150 years, but it would never again attempt such ambitious conquests. The defeats in Greece marked the beginning of a long, slow decline that would end with Alexander's conquest. Xerxes, after the Greek defeat. After returning from Greece in 479 BC, Xerxes faced enormous challenges. The failed invasion had cost the empire dearly. Thousands of soldiers were dead. The treasury was depleted. Persian prestige was damaged throughout the known world. Xerxes tried to restore his reputation through building projects. He completed construction at Persepolis. New palaces were built at Susa and Babylon. These projects employed thousands of workers and demonstrated royal wealth and power. But the king's character seemed changed by the Greek disasters. He became increasingly suspicious and paranoid. He executed several generals who had served in the Greek campaign. Court intrigue intensified as nobles competed for royal favor. Xerxes also became more interested in palace pleasures than imperial administration. He spent increasing time with his wives and concubines. He held elaborate banquets and festivals. The day-to-day governance of the empire was left to ministers and satraps. This neglect of imperial affairs had serious consequences. Satraps in distant provinces began acting more independently. Some stopped sending regular tribute to the royal court. Communication between the center and periphery became less efficient. Rebellions broke out in several provinces. Egypt revolted again in 460 BC. The Egyptians had never fully accepted Persian rule. They saw Xerxes' weakness as an opportunity to regain independence. The rebellion lasted for several years. In Babylon, there were also signs of unrest. The wealthy merchant families resented Persian taxation. They remembered the independence their city had enjoyed before Cyrus's conquest. Secret meetings discussed possible rebellion. Xerxes' response to these challenges was inconsistent. Sometimes he acted decisively, sending armies to crush rebellions. Other times he seemed paralyzed by indecision. This unpredictability made the situation worse. Court intrigues and assassination. The Persian court had always been a dangerous place. Kings were surrounded by ambitious nobles who competed for power and influence. But under Xerxes, court intrigue reached new levels of intensity. The most powerful figure at court was Artabanus, the commander of the royal bodyguard. He controlled access to the king. He could influence royal decisions. This position gave him enormous power, but also made him many enemies. Artabanus became convinced that the empire needed new leadership. Xerxes was too weak and indecisive. The defeats in Greece had shown his incompetence. For the empire's sake, he needed to be removed. The royal succession was also a source of tension. Xerxes had several sons, but the crown prince was Darius. He was an experienced military commander. He had served in the Egyptian campaigns. He seemed like a capable heir. But Artabanus feared that Darius would dismiss him when he became king. The prince had his own supporters and advisors. He would want to appoint his own commander of the royal guard. This would mean Artabanus's downfall. In 465 BC, Artabanus made his move. He assassinated both Xerxes and Crown Prince Darius. The murders took place in the royal palace at Persepolis. Artabanus claimed that Darius had killed his father and then been executed for the crime. The assassination threw the empire into crisis. There was no clear successor to the throne. Several princes had claims to power. The imperial administration was paralyzed by uncertainty. Artabanus hoped to control the new king, whoever that might be. He supported Artaxerxes, a younger son of Xerxes. Artaxerxes was inexperienced and presumably easier to manipulate than his older brothers. Artaxerxes becomes king. Artaxerxes was about 20 years old when he became king. He had little experience in government or military affairs. His appointment was largely due to Artabanus's support. Many expected the older general to be the real power behind the throne. But Artaxerxes proved more capable than anyone expected. He quickly learned about imperial administration. He listened to experienced advisors. Most importantly, he recognized that Artabanus was a threat to royal authority. The young king moved carefully against his father's assassin. He could not act openly, as Artabanus still commanded the royal guard. Instead, he began building his own network of supporters within the court. Several months after becoming king, Artaxerxes discovered evidence of Artabanus's guilt in his father's murder. He confronted the general privately. A fight broke out. Artabanus was killed, either by the king himself or by loyal guards. With Artabanus dead, Artaxerxes consolidated his power. He appointed new commanders for the royal guard. He promoted his own supporters to key positions. He began taking personal control of imperial policy. The new king faced immediate challenges. Several provinces had stopped sending tribute during the succession crisis. Rebels in Egypt had declared independence. The empire seemed to be fragmenting. Artaxerxes' first priority was restoring central authority. He sent armies to rebellious provinces. He replaced unreliable satraps with his own appointees. He demanded that all provinces resume regular tribute payments. The king also tried to restore Persian prestige. He commissioned new building projects. He held magnificent ceremonies at Persepolis. He wanted to show that the Persian Empire was still strong and unified. The Egyptian Rebellion. The Egyptian rebellion was the most serious challenge facing Artaxerxes. Egypt was wealthy and strategically important. Its loss would encourage rebellions in other provinces. The rebellion had to be crushed quickly and decisively. The Egyptian rebels were led by Inaros, a Libyan prince. He had declared himself pharaoh and established his capital at Memphis. His forces controlled most of the Nile Delta. They had also captured several important fortresses. Inaros had an important advantage: Athenian support. Athens was still at war with Persia. They saw the Egyptian rebellion as an opportunity to weaken their Persian enemies. Athenian ships and soldiers reinforced the Egyptian rebels. The combined Egyptian-Athenian force was formidable. They controlled the seas around Egypt. They had secure bases in the Nile Delta. They could receive supplies and reinforcements from Athens and other Greek cities. Artaxerxes assembled a large army to reconquer Egypt. The force was commanded by Megabyzus, one of his most capable generals. Persian troops marched across the desert from Palestine and Syria. The campaign was long and difficult. Egyptian forces used guerrilla tactics. They would attack Persian supply lines and then retreat into the marshes of the delta. The Persians found it difficult to bring them to decisive battle. Athenian naval forces also caused problems. They attacked Persian supply ships. They provided mobility for Egyptian forces. They could evacuate rebels when Persian pressure became too intense. But Persian resources were much greater than those of the rebels. Fresh troops arrived regularly from other provinces. The Persian fleet was gradually reinforced. Slowly, Persian control was re-established. Defeat of the Egyptian rebels. The turning point in the Egyptian campaign came in 454 BC. Megabyzus managed to trap the main rebel army near Memphis. The Egyptians and their Athenian allies were surrounded and forced to fight a pitched battle. The battle was fierce and prolonged. Both sides fought desperately. The Egyptians knew that defeat meant the end of their independence. The Athenians were fighting far from home, with no hope of rescue if defeated. But Persian discipline and superior numbers eventually prevailed. The rebel army was destroyed. Inaros was captured and later executed. The surviving Athenians surrendered or fled to their ships. The reconquest of Egypt was completed over the following months. Persian forces occupied all major cities. The tribute system was re-established. Harsh punishments were imposed on communities that had supported the rebellion. Artaxerxes appointed a new satrap for Egypt. This official was given strong military forces to prevent future rebellions. The tribute from Egypt was increased to compensate for the costs of the campaign. The successful Egyptian campaign restored Persian prestige. It showed that the empire could still defeat its enemies. It also demonstrated Artaxerxes' competence as a military leader. But the rebellion had revealed serious weaknesses in the Persian system. It had taken 6 years to suppress the revolt. During that time, other provinces had become restive. The empire's finances were strained by the military costs. Most importantly, the rebellion showed that Athens remained a dangerous enemy. As long as Greek cities remained independent, they could support rebellions within the Persian Empire. This problem needed to be addressed. Relations with the Greeks. After the Egyptian campaign, Artaxerxes focused on the Greek problem. Athens continued to interfere in Persian affairs. Greek ships raided Persian territory. Greek gold funded Persian rebels. This could not be allowed to continue. But direct military action against Greece had proven costly and unsuccessful. Xerxes' invasion had ended in disaster. A new approach was needed. Artaxerxes decided to use diplomacy and bribery rather than military force. Persian agents began operating in Greek cities. They offered gold to politicians who would support Persian interests. They funded political parties that opposed war with Persia. This was often more effective than military campaigns. The Persians also exploited divisions among the Greeks. Athens and Sparta were natural rivals. Persian diplomats encouraged this rivalry. Sometimes they would support Sparta against Athens, sometimes the reverse. This policy achieved some success. Several Greek cities made peace with Persia. Others became neutral in the conflict. The Greek alliance that had defeated Xerxes began to fracture. In 409 BC, Athens and Persia signed a formal peace treaty. This agreement, known as the Peace of Callias, ended the Persian Wars. Athens agreed to stop supporting rebels in the Persian Empire. Persia recognized Athenian control over the Aegean Sea. The peace treaty was a compromise. Neither side achieved all their goals, but it ended a conflict that had lasted for over 30 years. Both empires could focus on other problems. For Persia, the treaty was a strategic success. The Greek threat to imperial stability was neutralized. Resources could be redirected to other challenges. The empire could consolidate its gains and address internal problems. Internal reforms and administration. With external threats reduced, Artaxerxes turned to internal reform. The empire's administrative system needed updating. The satrap system created by Darius required modifications to address new challenges. The king increased central oversight of provincial governors. More inspectors were sent to monitor satrap performance. Financial audits became more frequent. This reduced corruption and improved tax collection. Communication systems were also improved. New roads were built in remote regions. The postal system was expanded and made more efficient. This helped maintain contact between the center and distant provinces. Artaxerxes also tried to address the empire's ethnic and religious diversity. Local customs were respected and protected. Traditional festivals were supported with royal funding. This policy helped maintain loyalty among subject peoples. The king completed several major building projects. The palace at Susa was expanded and beautified. New ceremonial halls were added to Persepolis. These projects provided employment and demonstrated royal power. Economic policies were also reformed. Trade regulations were standardized throughout the empire. Weights and measures were unified. This facilitated commerce and increased imperial revenues. The Persian legal system was codified during this period. Local laws were compiled and organized. Royal decrees were collected and published. This created more consistency in imperial administration. Military reforms were undertaken as well. The army was reorganized along more professional lines. Training was improved and standardized. New weapons and tactics were introduced from various parts of the empire. Growing decentralization. Despite these reforms, the Persian Empire was gradually becoming more decentralized. Distance and poor communication made central control difficult. Satraps necessarily exercised increasing independence in governing their provinces. Some satraps began acting like independent kings. They maintained their own armies. They made treaties with neighboring states. They collected taxes, but sent only a portion to the royal treasury. This trend was most pronounced in the western provinces. Satraps in Anatolia and Syria often ignored royal orders. They pursued their own policies regarding Greek cities. Sometimes they even fought against each other. The eastern provinces also showed signs of increasing independence. The satrap of Bactria controlled vast territories in Central Asia. Communications with this region were so slow that the satrap had to make most decisions independently. Artaxerxes tried to counter this trend by rotating satraps frequently. No governor was allowed to serve in the same province for more than a few years. This prevented them from building local power bases. The king also appointed royal princes as satraps in key provinces. Family members were presumably more loyal than other nobles. But even royal princes sometimes pursued independent policies. Economic factors contributed to decentralization. The costs of maintaining the empire were enormous. The central treasury could not fund all necessary expenses. Provinces had to become more self-sufficient. Cultural factors also played a role. The empire was too diverse to be ruled uniformly from a single center. Local traditions and languages remained strong. Persian culture never completely replaced local identities. The satrapal revolts begin. The first major satrapal revolt occurred in 372 BC during the reign of Artaxerxes II. The satrap of Sardis, Ariobarzanes, declared independence from Persian rule. He controlled most of western Anatolia. Ariobarzanes had several grievances against the central government. Royal taxes were excessive. Royal interference in provincial affairs was increasing. He felt that his loyalty and service were not properly rewarded. The rebel satrap was joined by several other governors. The satrap of Cappadocia and the satrap of Armenia also declared independence. Together, they controlled a large territory in Anatolia and the Caucasus. These rebels received support from Greek cities. Sparta provided military advisors and weapons. Athens offered naval assistance. The Greeks saw the revolts as an opportunity to weaken Persian power. The revolts spread to other regions. In Syria, the satrap of Damascus joined the rebellion. In Egypt, there were signs of renewed unrest. The empire seemed to be fragmenting along provincial lines. Artaxerxes II responded vigorously to these challenges. He assembled large armies to crush the rebellions. He also used diplomatic means, offering pardons to rebels who surrendered quickly. The campaign against the rebels was successful, but costly. Several major battles were fought. Cities were besieged and captured. Eventually, most of the rebel satraps were defeated or killed. But the revolts revealed serious problems in the imperial system. Provincial loyalty could not be taken for granted. The empire was becoming too large and diverse to govern effectively from a single center. Economic decline and social problems. By the 4th century BC, the Persian Empire was showing signs of economic decline. The constant warfare had drained the treasury. The costs of maintaining such a vast empire were becoming unsustainable. Trade, which had been a source of imperial wealth, was declining. Greek competition in Mediterranean markets reduced Persian profits. The empire's monopoly on luxury goods was being challenged by new trade routes. Agriculture, the foundation of ancient economies, was also suffering. Constant military campaigns disrupted farming. Peasants were conscripted as soldiers or fled to avoid taxation. Rural productivity declined. The imperial taxation system was becoming increasingly harsh. Provinces were required to send more tribute to fund military campaigns. This created resentment and encouraged rebellion. Some regions were overtaxed to the point of economic collapse. Social problems were also increasing. The gap between rich and poor was widening. The Persian nobility lived in luxury, while peasants struggled with poverty. This inequality created social tensions throughout the empire. Cultural assimilation, which had been a Persian strength, was breaking down. Subject peoples maintained their own identities more strongly. Persian culture failed to create unity among the empire's diverse populations. Religious tensions were also increasing. Different groups within the empire followed different gods and customs. The Persian policy of tolerance was sometimes seen as weakness rather than wisdom. The military was experiencing its own problems. The traditional Persian and Median troops were no longer as effective as they had been. Greek military innovations had made Persian tactics obsolete in many situations. Attempts at revival. Several Persian kings tried to address these problems and revive the empire's fortunes. Artaxerxes III, who ruled from 3058 to 3038 BC, was particularly energetic in attempting reforms. Artaxerxes III began by crushing remaining rebellions. He personally led armies against rebel satraps. He showed no mercy to those who had defied royal authority. This restored some respect for central power. The king also tried to reconquer Egypt, which had regained independence during the previous reign. After several failed attempts, he finally succeeded in 343 BC. Egypt was once again brought under Persian control. Administrative reforms were undertaken to improve imperial efficiency. The satrap system was reorganized. New officials were appointed to monitor provincial governors. Communication systems were improved. Military reforms were also implemented. The Persian army was modernized with Greek tactics and weapons. Greek mercenaries were hired to provide technical expertise. The royal guard was expanded and better trained. Economic policies were revised to increase imperial revenues. Trade agreements were negotiated with various states. New taxes were imposed on wealthy merchants and nobles. The tribute system was reformed to be more equitable, but these reforms came too late and were insufficient to address the empire's fundamental problems. The Persian Empire was too large, too diverse, and too decentralized to be effectively governed by ancient administrative methods. The empire's enemies were also becoming stronger. Greek city-states were developing new military technologies and tactics. Macedonia, under Philip II, was emerging as a major power. New threats were appearing on all frontiers. The rise of Macedonia. While Persia was struggling with internal problems, a new power was rising in the north. Macedonia, a kingdom in northern Greece, was being transformed by King Philip II into a formidable military force. Philip had spent time as a hostage in Thebes during his youth. There he learned about Greek military tactics and political methods. He also observed the weaknesses of traditional Greek city-state systems. When Philip became king of Macedonia in 359 BC, he immediately began military reforms. He created a new type of infantry formation called the phalanx. This was similar to the traditional Greek phalanx, but deeper and more flexible. Philip also developed a powerful cavalry force. Macedonian nobles were trained as heavy cavalry. They could break enemy lines that had been weakened by the phalanx. This combination of infantry and cavalry was devastatingly effective. The new Macedonian army conquered most of Greece. City after city submitted to Macedonian rule. Even Sparta and Athens, the great rivals of the Persian Wars, were forced to accept Philip's hegemony. Persian diplomats watched these developments with concern. A unified Greece under strong leadership posed a much greater threat than the divided city-states of the past. Philip clearly had ambitions beyond Greece. In 340 BC, Philip began making preparations for an invasion of the Persian Empire. He claimed to be avenging the Persian invasions of Greece. He also promised his soldiers the vast wealth of Persian cities. Persian agents tried to stop Philip through assassination. They funded his enemies within Macedonia. They offered support to any Greek cities that would rebel against Macedonian rule. But these efforts were unsuccessful. Death of Philip and rise of Alexander. In 336 BC, Philip II was assassinated at his daughter's wedding. The assassin was a Macedonian noble who had a personal grudge against the king, but some suspected Persian involvement in the plot. Philip's death threw Macedonia into temporary confusion. The succession was disputed. Several nobles claimed the throne. Greek cities hoped to regain their independence during the crisis. But Philip's son Alexander quickly consolidated power. He was only 20 years old, but he had been trained for leadership since childhood. He had served as a cavalry commander in his father's campaigns. Alexander's first task was securing his position within Macedonia. He executed potential rivals and confirmed the loyalty of the army. He also moved quickly to suppress rebellions in Greece. The young king demonstrated his military skills by capturing Thebes after it rebelled. The city was completely destroyed as a warning to other Greek cities. This established Alexander's reputation for ruthless efficiency. With Macedonia and Greece secure, Alexander turned his attention to Persia. He had inherited his father's invasion plans, but Alexander's ambitions went far beyond anything Philip had imagined. Alexander planned not just to conquer Persian territories in Anatolia, but to overthrow the entire Persian Empire. He wanted to rule from Macedonia to India. This was the most ambitious military undertaking in ancient history. Persian spies reported these preparations to King Darius III. The Persian king began assembling armies to defend the empire, but he underestimated the threat posed by the young Macedonian conqueror. Darius III and the final crisis. Darius III became king of Persia in 336 BC, the same year that Alexander inherited the Macedonian throne. Darius was an experienced administrator, but had little military experience. He had gained the throne through court intrigue rather than military achievement. The Persian Empire that Darius inherited was still vast and wealthy. It stretched from India to Egypt, from the Caucasus to the Arabian desert. Millions of people paid tribute to the Persian king. The royal treasury contained enormous wealth. But the empire was also weakened by the problems of previous decades. Provincial loyalty was questionable. The military was outdated. Administrative efficiency had declined. These weaknesses would prove fatal in the coming crisis. When news arrived of Alexander's invasion of Anatolia in 334 BC, Darius was not initially concerned. Many armies had invaded Persian territory over the centuries. All had been defeated or absorbed. The empire seemed too large and strong to be seriously threatened. Darius's first response was to send local forces to deal with the invasion. The satraps of western Anatolia were ordered to crush the Macedonian army. This had worked against previous invaders. Surely it would work again. But Alexander's army was unlike any force the Persians had previously faced. It was professional, well-trained, and led by a military genius. More importantly, it was highly motivated and cohesive. The Macedonians fought as a unified force rather than a collection of different peoples. The Persian forces in Anatolia were defeated at the Battle of the Granicus River. Alexander then marched down the coast, capturing city after city. Persian resistance collapsed with shocking speed. Only then did Darius realize the magnitude of the threat. He began assembling the largest army in Persian history. Troops were summoned from every corner of the empire. This would be a final test of Persian power. The end approaches. As Alexander's conquests continued, it became clear that the Persian Empire was facing its greatest crisis. The young Macedonian king was not just another invader seeking plunder. He intended to replace the Persian Empire with his own. Darius III made desperate attempts to save his empire. He offered Alexander vast bribes to withdraw. He proposed marriage alliances. He even offered to partition the empire. Alexander rejected all these proposals. The Persian king also tried military solutions. He assembled armies of unprecedented size. He hired Greek mercenaries to match Alexander's tactical advantages. He sought allies among the empire's enemies. But nothing could stop Alexander's advance. The Macedonian army seemed invincible. City after city submitted without resistance. Persian armies were defeated in every major battle. The ancient empire that had dominated the world for over 2 centuries was collapsing. The administrative system created by Cyrus and Darius was breaking down. Provincial governors fled or surrendered to Alexander. Persian culture, which had spread throughout the ancient world, was being replaced by Greek influence. The Zoroastrian religion was giving way to Greek gods. The Persian language was being superseded by Greek. The dream of Cyrus the Great, of a universal empire ruling with justice and tolerance, was ending. In its place would come a new empire, based on different principles and led by a conqueror who saw himself as a god. The final chapters of Persian history were about to be written. The empire that had lasted over 200 years was approaching its end. Soon, Alexander would stand in the ruins of Persepolis, master of the ancient world. Alexander's eastern campaign began. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with his army. He had about 35,000 men. This was smaller than most Persian armies, but it was perfectly trained and equipped. Every soldier was a professional warrior. Alexander's first target was the Persian forces in western Anatolia. The local satraps had assembled an army near the Granicus River. They intended to stop the invasion before it could gain momentum. The Battle of the Granicus was Alexander's first test against Persian forces. The Persians positioned themselves on the far side of the river. They expected Alexander to be cautious and look for a safer crossing point. Instead, Alexander attacked immediately. He led his cavalry across the river in a frontal assault. The Persian line broke under the shock of this unexpected tactic. Many Persian nobles were killed in the fighting. This victory opened all of western Anatolia to Alexander. Persian forces retreated eastward. Greek cities welcomed Alexander as a liberator. The Macedonian army marched rapidly along the coast. Darius III was still not seriously concerned. He had lost only a minor battle in a distant province. The empire's heartland remained secure. Surely local forces could contain this invasion. But Alexander was moving faster than anyone expected. Within months, he had conquered most of the Anatolian coast. Persian resistance was collapsing everywhere. The speed of his advance was unprecedented. The Battle of Issus. By 333 BC, Darius realized he needed to act personally. He assembled a large army and marched to confront Alexander. The two armies met near the city of Issus on the coast of Syria. Darius had perhaps 100,000 troops, including many elite Persian and Median units. He also had Greek mercenaries who understood Macedonian tactics. The Persian king was confident of victory. But Alexander chose the battlefield carefully. The coastal plain near Issus was narrow. This prevented the Persians from using their numerical advantage. The battle would be decided by skill rather than numbers. Alexander deployed his troops in his standard formation. The phalanx held the center. Heavy cavalry protected the right wing. Light troops and allies covered the left. He himself led the companion cavalry on the right. The battle began with Alexander's cavalry charge against the Persian left wing. He aimed directly at Darius's position in the center of the Persian line. If he could kill or capture the Persian king, the battle would be won. Darius panicked as Alexander's horsemen approached his chariot. The Persian king fled the battlefield, abandoning his army. When the Persian troops saw their king retreating, their morale collapsed. The Persian army disintegrated. Soldiers fled in all directions. Thousands were killed as they tried to escape. Alexander captured the Persian royal camp with all its treasures. More importantly, Alexander captured Darius's family. The Persian king's mother, wife, and daughters were now prisoners. This gave Alexander valuable hostages and increased his prestige throughout the Persian Empire. Alexander's advance through the empire. After Assus, Alexander continued his methodical conquest of the Persian Empire. He marched south through Syria and Palestine. Most cities surrendered without resistance. The Persian administration collapsed ahead of his advance. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator. The Egyptians had never fully accepted Persian rule. They crowned Alexander as pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria at the mouth of the Nile. While in Egypt, Alexander visited the oracle of Ammon at Siwa. The priests declared him a son of the god Ammon. This gave Alexander divine status in Egyptian religion. It also increased his confidence in his destiny. From Egypt, Alexander marched back through Palestine and Syria toward the Persian heartland. Darius was assembling another army, even larger than the first. The final confrontation was approaching. Alexander's reputation preceded him. Many Persian nobles began secretly negotiating with the Macedonians. They hoped to preserve their positions under the new regime. The empire was betraying itself from within. Local populations often welcomed Alexander's forces. Persian rule had been harsh in many regions. The promise of new leadership attracted support from subject peoples throughout the empire. Alexander also adopted Persian customs when it suited his purposes. He wore Persian royal dress on formal occasions. He appointed Persian nobles to administrative positions. This helped legitimize his rule in Persian eyes. But Alexander remained fundamentally a conqueror rather than a ruler. His primary interest was military glory. He left the details of administration to subordinates while he planned new campaigns. The Battle of Gaugamela. In 331 BC, the final great battle between Persia and Macedonia took place near the village of Gaugamela in northern Mesopotamia. Darius had assembled the largest army in Persian history for this encounter. The Persian force included troops from throughout the empire. There were Persian and Median heavy cavalry. Scythian horse archers provided mobility. Indian war elephants added shock value. Greek mercenaries brought tactical expertise. Darius chose the battlefield carefully. The plain near Gaugamela was wide and flat. It favored cavalry operations and allowed the Persians to use their numerical advantage. The ground was even cleared of obstacles. Alexander's army was much smaller, perhaps 40,000 men against 250,000 Persians. But the Macedonians were veterans of many campaigns. They had complete confidence in their king and their tactics. The battle began at dawn. Darius launched his scythed chariots against the Macedonian line. These vehicles had sharp blades attached to their wheels. They were designed to break infantry formations. But Alexander's troops were prepared for this tactic. They opened gaps in their line to let the chariots pass through harmlessly. Light troops then attacked the chariot crews with javelins and arrows. The main battle developed when Alexander led his companion cavalry against the Persian left wing. As always, he aimed for the enemy king's position. If he could break the Persian center, the battle would be won. Darius tried to hold his position, but Alexander's assault was irresistible. The Persian center began to waver. Once again, Darius fled the battlefield when his life was threatened. The fall of Persepolis. With Darius in flight and his army destroyed, the path to the Persian capitals lay open. Alexander marched rapidly toward Babylon, the administrative center of the empire. Babylon surrendered without a siege. The city's governors opened the gates and welcomed Alexander as king. The treasury was surrendered intact. Alexander now controlled the empire's financial resources. From Babylon, Alexander marched to Susa, another of the Persian capitals. Again, the city surrendered without resistance. More treasure was captured. Alexander was becoming the richest man in the world. But Alexander's ultimate goal was Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. This city symbolized Persian power and prestige. Its capture would mark the end of the old order. Persepolis was strongly fortified and contained enormous treasures, but the garrison was small, and the population was demoralized by news of Alexander's victories. Resistance was brief and ineffective. Alexander's troops occupied Persepolis in early 30. The treasures captured there were beyond calculation. It took thousands of pack animals to carry away the gold and silver. But Alexander's treatment of Persepolis was controversial. During a drinking party, he allowed the city to be burned. The great palaces of Darius and Xerxes were destroyed. Centuries of Persian art and culture went up in flames. Some said the burning was revenge for the Persian destruction of Athens 150 years earlier. Others claimed it was an accident caused by Alexander's drunkenness. Whatever the cause, it marked the symbolic end of the Persian Empire. The death of Darius III. After the destruction of Persepolis, Alexander pursued Darius eastward. The Persian king was trying to reach the eastern provinces, where he might assemble new armies. But his support was crumbling everywhere. Darius's own nobles began to abandon him. They saw no future in continued resistance. Some opened negotiations with Alexander. Others simply disappeared into the countryside with their followers. In the summer of 3030 BC, Darius was betrayed by his remaining supporters. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, arrested the Persian king. He claimed to be acting for the good of the empire. Bessus and his fellow conspirators planned to use Darius as a bargaining chip with Alexander. They would offer to surrender the last Persian king in exchange for guarantees of their own safety and positions. But Alexander was advancing too quickly. When the conspirators realized they would be caught with their prisoner, they made a fatal decision. They killed Darius to prevent his rescue. Alexander found Darius's body beside the road. According to legend, the Persian king was still alive when Alexander reached him. The two great enemies supposedly spoke briefly before Darius died. Whether or not this meeting actually occurred, Darius's death marked the end of the Achaemenid dynasty. The family that had ruled the Persian Empire for over 200 years was extinct. Alexander gave Darius a royal funeral at Persepolis. This gesture won him respect from Persian nobles. It showed that he honored the Persian royal tradition even as he replaced it. Alexander as the new Persian king. With Darius dead, Alexander declared himself King of Kings, the traditional Persian imperial title. He began adopting more Persian customs and ceremonies. He wanted to rule Persians as well as Macedonians. Alexander appointed Persian nobles to important positions. He kept the satrap system, but placed his own governors in key provinces. The Persian administrative structure was preserved under new leadership. The conqueror also began wearing Persian royal dress. He performed traditional Persian ceremonies. He adopted the Persian practice of proskynesis, requiring subjects to prostrate themselves before the king. These changes troubled Alexander's Macedonian followers. They had conquered Persia to loot it, not to become Persians themselves. Some began to question their king's judgment and loyalty. Alexander tried to blend Macedonian and Persian cultures. He arranged mass marriages between his officers and Persian noblewomen. He recruited Persian troops for his army. He founded cities with mixed populations. But this cultural fusion was artificial and unstable. The two civilizations were too different to merge easily. Most Macedonians remained suspicious of Persian customs. Most Persians resented their foreign conquerors. Alexander's adoption of Persian customs was probably more political than personal. He needed Persian cooperation to govern his vast empire. Appearing as a legitimate Persian king helped secure this cooperation. The policy achieved some success. Many Persians accepted Alexander's rule. The transition from Persian to Macedonian control was relatively smooth in most regions. The empire remained unified. Alexander's death and the succession crisis. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC at the age of 32. His death was sudden and unexpected. He had been planning new campaigns in Arabia and possibly India. His empire was left without clear leadership. The succession crisis was immediate and severe. Alexander had no adult heir. His generals, called the Diadochi, began competing for control of different parts of the empire. Unity quickly broke down. Ptolemy seized Egypt and founded a dynasty that would rule there for 300. Seleucus took control of the eastern territories, including Persia proper. Antigonus claimed authority over Anatolia and Syria. These successor kingdoms fought constantly among themselves. The unity that Alexander had imposed through his personal leadership disappeared. The empire fragmented into rival states. Persian culture began to reassert itself in the eastern kingdoms. The Seleucid Empire, which controlled most of former Persia, gradually became more Persian in character. Greek influence remained strong, but was no longer dominant. Local Persian nobles regained some of their former power. The satrap system continued to function. Persian religious practices were revived. The Zoroastrian faith survived and flourished under the new rulers. But the old Persian Empire was gone forever. Never again would there be a unified state stretching from India to Egypt. The age of Persian dominance in the ancient world had ended. The legacy of ancient Persia. The Persian Empire left a lasting legacy that extended far beyond its political boundaries. Persian administrative methods influenced later empires. The concept of ruling diverse peoples with tolerance became a model for future conquerors. Persian art and architecture spread throughout the ancient world. The columned halls of Persepolis inspired buildings from Egypt to India. Persian decorative motifs appeared in the art of many cultures. The Persian language became the diplomatic language of much of Asia. Persian poetry and literature influenced cultural development across the region. Persian scientific and mathematical knowledge was preserved and transmitted. Persian religious ideas had profound effects on later faiths. Zoroastrianism influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Persian concept of cosmic dualism between good and evil became widespread. The Persian road system and postal service became models for later empires. Roman road building was influenced by Persian examples. The idea of rapid communication across vast distances originated with the Persians. Persian legal concepts also survived. The idea of written law codes applied uniformly across diverse populations was a Persian innovation. This influenced Roman law and, through it, modern legal systems. Most importantly, the Persians demonstrated that diverse peoples could be united in a single state while maintaining their own identities. This lesson was not forgotten by later empire builders. The Persian Empire was the first truly global empire. It connected east and west, north and south. It created trade networks that linked distant civilizations. This integration changed the ancient world forever. Conclusion: the end of an era. As we reach the end of our journey through Persian history, we can see how this remarkable empire shaped the ancient world. For over 2 centuries, Persia was the dominant force in human civilization. The empire began with Cyrus the Great's vision of uniting all peoples under just rule. It reached its peak under Darius, who created administrative systems that governed millions. It faced its greatest test under Xerxes, who tried to conquer Europe. The Persian Empire achieved things that seemed impossible. It united peoples from India to Egypt. It created prosperity and peace across vast territories. It preserved and protected countless local cultures and traditions. But empires, like all human institutions, have natural lifespans. The Persian Empire became too large to govern effectively. Internal divisions weakened it from within. External enemies eventually overwhelmed it. Alexander's conquest was not just a military victory. It was the triumph of a new age over an old one. The age of Persian dominance was ending. The age of Hellenistic civilization was beginning. Yet Persian influence did not disappear. It was absorbed and transformed by the cultures that succeeded it. Persian ideas about government, art, and religion continued to influence human development for centuries. The story of ancient Persia teaches us about the possibilities and limits of human ambition. It shows how great leaders can unite diverse peoples and create lasting prosperity. It also shows how even the mightiest empires eventually fall. Tonight, as you rest, remember the Persian emperors who once ruled the world. Remember Cyrus with his vision of universal justice. Remember Darius with his genius for organization. Remember their empire that connected distant lands and peoples. The ancient world sleeps now, as you will soon. The great cities of Persepolis and Susa are ruins. The Persian kings are dust, but their legacy lives on in the civilizations they helped create. Sleep well, knowing that even the mightiest empires pass away, but human achievements endure.